you laughing. I hear you laughing.
Hey, film hack, dude.
Yeah?
You better be kind and review, or else I'll be doing the hacking.
Okay. Okay, fuck this. I finished this damn video. That was weird. Okay, hey guys, what's up? Yeah, just finishing up the Nightmare on Elm Street thoughts video. But first, Booyah beer from Wachusett Brewery in Westminster, Massachusetts. It's excellent. Welcome back. I'm the Film Hack Dude. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger. Freddy. I always grew up knowing about Freddy Krueger. I didn't watch the movies much as a kid because I was just too afraid. It's not even that my folks wouldn't let me, but I was just I wasn't really interested. I'm sure I saw bits and pieces, on TV. As I got older, of course, I started to get more interested. When I got in middle school and high school, I had friends that watched horror movies and all the slasher movies and stuff, Jason and everything, Halloween. But yeah, Freddy. My cousins were into Freddy quite a bit. They were afraid of him, but they watched the movies anyway. So I was kind of more exposed over there. So from what I understood from a young age was Freddy was almost like comedy and scary. It wouldn't be until years later that I would find out, as the movies progressed, they just got more ridiculous as they went on. But yeah, so just like I did with Friday the 13th, this is kind of an overview of all the films and talk about just my thoughts on the franchise as a whole. So I guess starting with the first, we have Nightmare on Elm Street. So this is by far the best one. By far the best. The idea, the concept was solid. The execution was solid. Everything, the casting, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were making and they made it. And it's great. It's one of the best, 80s, horror films ever. It's definitely, it's got some goofy moments and it's got some humor in it. Not as much as the later films, but no, it's definitely the best one of them all. It's really straightforward and gets right into it, where you learn fairly quickly like what the concept of the film is. And there's this guy, and he's getting into kids' dreams, and he's killing them in their dreams, and then they die in real life. Simple concept. And Robert Englund was pretty incredible as Freddy. Unlike Jason, where different actors kind of played him over the years, and the kind of look of him kind of varied. Freddy Krueger was played by Robert Englund in every film except for the remake. But even at his age today, I think he's still capable of pulling it off. This definitely is a role. It's a career, defining role. Definitely a role of a lifetime. So everything from just the look of the character was pretty perfect. The hat, the sweater, the glove. They already in the very first one they had these iconic images. They had these iconic props that define the character right away. and it worked. You know, they knew it, and that design, you know, didn't change at all, really. You know, makeup may have been a little bit different from movie to movie, but this was it. You know, the first Nightmare on Elm Street is by far the best, and the only part I would say that kind of confuses me to this day is the ending, really. Now I have heard recently that Wes Craven, I don't know if he was forced, but they changed the ending. Originally, the bus was, well, they were supposed to be picked up by a bus and it was supposed to drive off into the fog, and that was it. If you actually watch the film, Nancy's picked up by her friends and they're all still alive. The mom's alive. They get in the convertible and the hood, you know, the top comes down and it's painted like Freddy's sweater. Meaning what? I don't really know. That this is a dream. The windows roll up. All the kids start freaking out and they drive off to school. And that's it. That's the last we see of them. The mom's kind of smiling like nothing's happening, and then Freddy reaches through the door, you know, whoosh, and pulls the mom through the small window about this big. It's, you know, it doesn't look very real. It's, you know, it's actually it's probably the worst shot in the film, but it's shocking, and then it just cuts to black. So yeah, you know, kind of a shocking ending, I guess, and I don't get it. You know, I'm not gonna lie. Is it a dream? Do they all die? When she defeats Freddy in the end, basically just doesn't believe in him anymore, and he disappears. You know, he tries to attack her, but he just, you know, dissipates. And then she walks out her mother's bedroom door, and she's outside. So I don't get that either. Because she defeated him, does that mean all her friends are back to life and none of it happened? Was it all a dream? Is the ending a dream? You know what I mean? They kind of just leave it open. So the entire movie's solid and makes sense, and I 100% get it, except for just that ending. And it might not make sense, but you know, you can look past that though, because the rest of the movie is great. But yeah, that's the only negative thing I have to say about the first one. So also, Freddy's he's scary in this. I'll never forget, you know, the first time seeing when he's in the alley and his arms go out and they're different lengths. And one of them's like really super long and you can't really see him. He's kind of shrouded in shadow and you just kind of see his silhouette. I'll never forget that. And the imagery in this movie is really good. Special effects are great. They're practical effects. I mean, there might be a couple, you know, I don't even think they had digital effects back then, but every effect shot looks great. My two favorite shots, I think my favorite shot in the whole film is when she's sleeping and you see the wall behind her and you see the hands come out and his face comes out of the wall and then just pulls back in. So I guess it was like spandex or a sheet or something like that, something like really, you know, stretchy material that they used, and it looked great. Today that would be CGI. In the remake, it was CGI and it looked like shit. But it looked great. It was back in 1984. So yeah, he was really scary. There was a couple of little jokes in it, but for the most part, he was pretty terrifying. But yeah, no, first one was pretty good. Second one, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddys Revenge. This one I had not seen until this past year. My father-in-law actually, he bought me the box set of DVDs, the entire Nightmare on Elm Street series. And a couple years ago for Christmas, he found it at like a consignment shop. It was probably like $8. So that was a score. But yeah, I hadn't really gotten around to watching it until quarantine. This was the one I was most curious about. I'd owned I bought the first one, 15, 20 years ago, and so I knew the first one very well. But this part 2 was never on TV. I never saw it on demand. It was just never available ever. So I watched it, and a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people think it sucks. It didn't suck. He was just as scary as he was in the first one, but they clearly didn't have a good idea as to what they were doing with the film. Like, the filmmakers didn't have a great idea. The concept was not clear. It seemed like they were maybe confused as to what his abilities were, what Freddy's powers were, what were the rules of this world. So he pretty much tries to take possession of this guy's body, this high school kid's body. And it's not something he ever tried to do in the first one. He was still going into people's dreams, but he was going to his dreams and making him do stuff while he was asleep. And it was like kind of a complete different concept of the character. If this had been like a movie on its own, it was almost like this could be the first film of a franchise. So I just don't think they knew what to do with the film. The acting's fine, you know what I mean? It was, the mid-'80s, and, teen actors are teen actors. But it's definitely kind of out there. It's pretty gruesome at times. They didn't quite know what to do with them. But as a movie, it was okay. There was a couple of neat dream sequences. And Freddy was still pretty scary. The scene where he comes into the real world at the pool and starts slashing people up, that scene was pretty frightening. Whenever he comes into the real world, there's like this sense of, like, there's this tension, like, oh man, what's he gonna do? He's not gonna do any weird fantasy dream tricks. He's just gonna slice people up, There's a rawness to it. But could you skip this entry altogether? Yes, you could. You could watch the first one and jump right into 3. And let's do that right now. So Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. I don't know the backstory of the team of people that put it together, but whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. This is possibly as good as the first. Some people like it even more, but it's definitely the strongest and the best sequel. So yeah, The Dream Warriors, I mostly knew it from the Dokken tune. The Dokken song, Dream Warriors, they did the theme song, and I thought it was a pretty cool tune. So I'm a guitar player. I grew up listening to 80s rock, so that was right down my alley. So rocking like Dokken. It takes place maybe 5 to 6 years after the first one. So Nancy, she's grown up a little bit, and looks like she's gone into some kind of psychology field. So Nancy ends up going to this hospital where these kids are, and they're all having like sleep problems and dream problems, and some of them have substance abuse problems. It's basically a rehabilitation center for kids. And Patricia Arquette is introduced. Kristen, she pretty much becomes the star of the film, and every character is really strong in this. Even Lawrence Fishburne has a little part in it. They basically have like these little sessions where they talk about what's going on in their dreams, and Nancy comes in to help the doctor with the kids. Freddy's pretty scary in this one, but a lot of the humor starts, a lot of the jokes, the goofing around. The kills are pretty inventive. There's the one kid that, he pulls his veins out and he uses them like puppet strings. That was pretty wild. I remember that from being a kid. The TV smashed, the girl that gets smashed into the TV, it's a pretty memorable one. But yeah, there's a lot. And I guess what I like in these types of movies is when they offer something more than just people like, or when they offer something more than just teenagers getting hacked up. And they, all trained a little bit, she tried to teach them all how to use their powers in their dreams. Like they all have a dream power kind of thing. Hence the Dream Warriors. They basically willingly go into the dream and they try to get Freddy, you know what I mean? They try to stop him. So I thought that was kind of cool how they kind of fought against him. Nancy, unfortunately, meets her end in this film, and the torch is kind of passed from her to Kristen, Patricia Arquette, and she's clearly like the most powerful. But yeah, this was a solid entry. John Saxon comes back as well as her dad. So I guess what they try to do is they try to figure out a way to, kill Freddy or set him to rest. So they get the idea to dig up his bones. So she asked, Nancy asked her father, where the bones are, and so they can dig them up. And when they go to dig them up, the bones come back to life. So Freddy kind of takes over the bones. So it looks kind of like Terminator a little bit, like stop motion, and it's kind of cheesy, but for the time, that was pretty cool. But no, it was a pretty solid entry. It's definitely the best of the sequels. From here on out, things get a little wacky and not so great. So Nancy dies in the Dream Warriors, unfortunately. Patricia Arquette, Kristen becomes the new lead. She's the final girl. And then we have part 4, A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Master. A Nightmare on Elm Street part 4, The Dream Master. This is when I started to, while watching it, even getting a little confused. So right off the bat, Kristen was recast, different actress playing her. So at first I wasn't sure it was supposed to be her or not, and because it opens with her in a dream. So you just assume, okay, this must be her. They both have blonde hair. That's how they got around that. But there are some returning cast members from the Dream Warriors. 2 of the cast members come back, and the 3 of them are kind of friends, and they go into regular school now. Apparently they don't have to go to the rehab center anymore because they're cured of their dreams. But they've got another set of friends as well, and you can tell, okay, these are new kids, are the cannon fodder. But unfortunately they kill off the remaining cast from part 3 pretty early on in the film. And she starts having dreams again, and she starts pulling her friends into her dreams, and they're getting killed by Freddy. So she feels bad, it's her fault kind of thing. And the girl who will become the star, moving forward in the franchise, they kind of introduce her in kind of an odd way, like she knows something the whole time. And it was just kind of odd. This isn't a bad movie, but it was just not as tight as the Dream Warriors. Some of the characters are a little annoying. None of it's realistic. A lot of the interactions are just weird. There's a brother-sister combo, and the brother goes out with Kristen. I don't know. No. So yeah, some of the characters are kind of annoying. The brother that does the karate is just, I didn't buy it at all. He just didn't really look the part. He looked like he just learned these moves like right before they shot, right before they rolled film. Not very convincing. Some of them are all right. This isn't a really gory movie. This one is definitely more fantasy, I guess. Freddy wasn't all that scary in it. you could tell it just started to change. A lot more humor was introduced. But ultimately, Kristen is killed. I think she gets thrown in the furnace or something. And right before she goes, she gives her power to the new girl. Can't really remember her name. I think the boyfriend's name was Dan. The reason I can't really remember the names is no one really sticks around long enough to really get to know them. And that was part of the problem with these later films. So we're in part 4 now, and everybody's just, you're just waiting for people to die. So the weird thing that happens is, as each of her friends die, she starts to gain the abilities of these friends. One of them works out, one of them does karate. One of them is really smart. So she basically starts to take these traits on, and when they're all dead, she decides, okay, I'm gonna go in and fight them now with all my dead friends' abilities, which is kind of cheesy, but whatever. It was when the scene happens, it's kind of cool. You can kind of get into it. It's very 80s. She puts her a leather jacket on and her headband and stuff, and she goes and she becomes like a badass. She's gonna go kick his ass basically. And I think the only surviving friend is Dan. I think his name is Dan. It's like the to-be boyfriend, which doesn't really make a ton of sense either. He's like Mr. Cool Jock, and she's like the super quiet girl, and there's nothing that really develops their relationship. It just kind of happens quick. But whatever. So there's a really weird sequence in this as well when they're trying to get to a certain location, and Dan's meeting her, where he's waiting at his truck, and then she comes around a corner, they get in the car and they drive there. And then it cuts, and then she comes around the corner, gets in the truck, and they drive there again. And then again, and then again. I think this happens 4 or 5 times, and I wasn't sure. I thought the DVD was skipping, because I think they did use the same footage over and over. But no, they're in some kind of loop. So I guess that's where the series, it starts to take a turn in this film, where you're not really sure what Freddy's abilities are. Is he doing this? Are they even dreaming? Did he fall asleep waiting for her? It's kind of out there a little bit. So they both survive, and they beat him in the end. It doesn't really matter how, because the next one is kind of shit. Which brings us to that one, part 5, The Nightmare on Elm Street, part 5, The Dream Child. So Dan and the new girl, who's now not the new girl, whose hair looks different in part 5. And I wasn't quite sure if it was the same actress even at first, but I figured out pretty quickly it was. There's a whole new group of friends. Once again, cannon fodder. So in this one, they defeated Freddy last time, so they're not really worried about him. But then he starts popping up again, and she doesn't understand how or why. It's why is how is Freddy coming to me when I'm awake? She's not even sleeping, and she's seeing visions, and bad things are happening, and they're happening to her friends now when she's awake. Come to find out, she's pregnant. Her and Dan, the boyfriend, got it on, and she's pregnant. And what's happening is, while the baby sleeps, the baby's dreaming, Freddy's finding his way into their world through the baby's dreams. That I didn't have a big problem with. That part's kind of neat. It's not that bad. And it seems he wants to be reborn through the child or something. But this one starts to get pretty messy as well. Yeah, I guess I don't really have a lot to say about this one. She survives in the end. I think Dan dies. I think everybody else dies. The one thing I will say is when I was a kid, I remembered seeing on TV that there was this scene in one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and I didn't know which one because I could never tell when I was, I'd always, I'd pop on USA, at, I don't know, Saturday night at like 11:30 or something, and it would be on. I didn't know which one I'd be watching. But the scene when he's going after this guy, and he's an artist, and he all of a sudden, takes control of his dream, and he becomes this comic book character that he designed. And I always thought that was really cool. I was waiting for that while watching these movies, like which one is it in? As soon as I saw the character in this movie, I was like, oh, this is the one. And it was, kind of a neat scene, but, wasn't like I remembered it. It wasn't really that great. Yeah, there's even more goofiness in this one. But it's not the worst of the franchise, but it's not that good. There's some pretty grotesque special effects in this film, from what I remember. But you could tell they started to lose sight. They started to lose sight of what Nightmare on Elm Street was, of what Freddy Krueger was. So I'm pretty sure the girl ends up surviving, and with the baby and everything. Dan dies, from what I remember. He dies in a car accident or something, and Freddy's driving the car. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happens. But yeah, this one wasn't that good. It's pretty goofy. So that was part 5. So going into part 6, we have Freddys Dead, the Final Nightmare. I remember seeing previews for this one. I remember this coming out, and I'm pretty sure this was 90 or 91, probably 90. It was in 3D, and the box set of DVDs I got did come with 3D glasses, so that's cool. I haven't watched it in 3D. I think the Jason part 3 3D looked better than this. This was just like CGI stuff constantly being flown, constantly being thrown at the screen. Amongst most Nightmare fans, this one is known to be a piece of shit. It's a piece of shit. I remember seeing it on TV a lot. I remember that opening scene with the kid falling, and then they had like the Wizard of Oz reference, and it was like a massive joke. Freddy was very much a prankster in this. That Breckenmeyer kid, that guy was in this. He was jumping around like, I don't know, like it was a Bugs Bunny cartoon where he was playing like, Freddy had like his glove, it was like a power glove, and he was controlling him in a dream. It was all just kind of stupid. The one scene with that doctor beating him with the bat, I thought that was kind of cool. I remember that scene, and but then they introduce this character that ends up being Freddy's daughter, and it kind of comes out of nowhere, and like, where's this character been the whole time? Why wasn't she ever introduced? You could just tell the creative was just pulling stuff out of their butts. They just pulled this character out of their ass. I did like the backstory. Freddy, before he was burnt, and he had scene with the daughter, and I thought some of those shots were kind of cool. But ultimately, as a story, this was bad all around. Goofy, the humor was over the top, and the story was just really messy. The 3D effects looked bad, and I guess they just blow him up at the end. She brings him into the real world like Nancy did, and they just blow him up, and then he's dead, and these weird, like, I don't know, leech things or spirit things come out of him, and then I guess they go back to hell. and they do show when Freddy was burnt, when he was killed, originally, about how these three demon spirit things possessed him, and that's what gave him his power. So apparently when they blow him up in the real world, they come out and they go back to hell. I don't know. It was kind of a shit movie. It sucked. Not a lot of people liked it, so I guess they were glad it was over. 4 years later, about 94, when the series would return, and this time it was quite different. That brings us to Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, I was definitely old enough at this time. I was probably about 12. This came out in 94. I was about 12. This one, I thought looked really cool. The idea was Freddy actually came out of the movie into the real world. So the actress who played Nancy came back. John Saxon came back. So the story follows the actress who played Nancy, and she's still living in Hollywood, and her husband works on special effects, and they have a son, and does fan appearances, interviews, and right from the very beginning of the movie, they're working on a new glove for Freddy, and it goes haywire. It's like a mechanical glove, and it goes nuts and kills a guy, and it ends up being a dream. It ends up being Heather dreaming, and because at the time there was a lot of earthquakes, and that's, if I remember correctly, in '94 there was a really bad earthquake that happened in California, and it collapsed freeways, and it was pretty bad. And they must have made this movie right around that time, just right after it, and where they kept having aftershocks, and they kind of worked that into the movie. They didn't just work the aftershocks into the movie, they used them as those were signs of, I think, Freddy trying to break through to reality. So the concept was kind of cool. The idea was there. At the time when it came out, I'm not sure people were interested in the reality bending concept. It would probably go over better now. I think audiences are more primed for something like that now. Back then they were just like, this is way different, dude. It wasn't what they were used to. But I used to think it was a good movie. Remember when I first saw it, I thought it was really good, and then I watched it recently, and it didn't really hold up. It wasn't as good as I had remembered it. And part of the problem is all these people are supposed to be real, and they're kind of playing themselves. Like Robert Englund is in the movie. He plays himself. And he plays the version of Freddy who's trying to break through. And the version that's trying to break through reality, the version of Freddy who's trying to break out into the movies, into our reality, looks a little different. They changed him, purposely. Even him acting like himself, he acts like, he knows something sometimes, and he acts like a little suspicious. Heather, who plays Nancy, is supposedly, she's playing herself, but she's acting like Nancy. You know what I mean? It's so it definitely didn't hold up like it did, the first time I saw it. The little kid that's in it, he was in Pet Sematary and Kindergarten Cop. You didn't recognize him. He was in a bunch of movies at that time. In the early 90s, he was like the kid actor, and he was pretty good. He was just kind of creepy the whole time, little red rum kid. But he was just acting freaked out. He was like seeing Freddy and obviously having dreams about him. But yeah, everybody's acting was a little bit over the top. You could feel the 90s coming. that Scream, kind of acting, because this either was like probably a couple years before the first Scream came out, or the year before, I can't remember. But Scream came out shortly after this, and Wes Craven directed that. I think he wrote it too. Looking back on it now, it does look a little dated. It's much better than Part 5. And it's much better than Part 6. But yeah, it's okay. It's definitely not a slasher movie. It's like a psychological kind of thing, and she keeps experiencing these aftershocks, Heather, Nancy, and it just starts to get a little old after a while. And I think maybe I've just, at that time I remember seeing so many movies, not just like this. I guess there was a lot of movies with this kind of production in the early 90s, and it seeing it now, it looked a little stale. There's even a sequence where she's racing either back to the house or to the hospital or back and forth or whatever, and the music that's playing, I'm like, I've heard this before. I've heard this music in something else. Turns out I did. It was from Speed, and it wasn't exactly the same, but it was very close to one of the motifs from Speed. And it was, right around that time as well. So there was just a certain 90s style that was all over this movie that kind of takes away from the film's identity. But, some people consider it one of the better entries in the franchise, and it wasn't terrible. It didn't suck. It just wasn't good as I remembered it. There's some pretty cool sequences in it though. If you like the series and you hadn't seen that one, I would check that out. And then the franchise would lay dormant for a while until Freddy vs. Jason. I covered this a little bit. Friday the 13th thoughts video, but I didn't talk about it much because it is more of a Nightmare on Elm Street film than a Friday the 13th film, and there is a reason for that. So in the early 90s, New Line Cinema acquired the rights to the Friday the 13th films. Jason Takes Manhattan was the last film that was made by Paramount. Jason Goes to Hell and Jason 10, Jason in Space, that was all New Line, which is why they were able to do the Freddy, sticks his hand up and grabs Jason's mask. I think I wondered at the time, like, how do they do that? How do they allow that? But that's how New Line Cinema at that time owned both franchises. So I always saw Freddy vs. Jason as more of a nightmare film, and the main reason for that is it's Freddy that puts everything into action. Kids are no longer afraid of him. Years have gone by, and he needs the children to be afraid again. So he's like, well, what scares kids? Jason scares kids. He wakes Jason up and uses him as kind of like a pawn to make kids afraid again. So he kind of aims them. He's like Freddy's the mastermind, Jason's the muscle. As I said in my Friday the 13th reviews, this was a decent movie from what I remember. The acting's bad, of course. It's got the early 2000s mojo all over it. It doesn't have the character that the 80s films had. Not even what the 90s films had. This has like an MTV quality. MTV may have even been involved in the production. I'm not even sure. I think they may have even been involved in Part 10, Jason 10 too. One of the Destiny's Child girls was in it. It had an MTV feel. So the kids are the worst part of the movie. I think John Ritter's son, is in it as well. He's okay, but everybody else is pretty throwaway. There's some, cool special effects, but most of it's kind of shitty. But the best part of the movie is Freddy and Jason. They go at it quite a bit. There's a lot of scenes where they fight, and it is kind of neat, like where Jason's stronger in the real world and Freddy's stronger in the dream world. But the budget was definitely higher in this film. And some of the Freddy stuff I thought was really cool. I always thought the shot where he comes out of the water and, slow motion, lands on the dock. There was some badass Freddy moments in this that I thought were really good. Much better than anything we'd seen in the last few films, since the first. But he seemed really powerful in this one, and that was by design, I guess. But also, I think it's a product of the time where they tried to make him look cool. They tried to make him look indestructible. But yeah, all the Jason versus Freddy part of the movie was pretty enjoyable. The kids were all pretty stupid. But, if you like this stuff, then maybe you'll enjoy it. And then that didn't go anywhere. They didn't do any more, with them versus other slasher icons. That was the end of that. That was the end for a little bit until they did the reboot, the remake, and starring Jackie Earle Haley, who I like. I like him a lot. He's great in Watchmen. I remember when the Bad News Bears back in the day on the motorcycle. I thought he was pretty cool. He's good in everything he's in. But I thought his Freddy Krueger was pretty good. The makeup work was a little weird. You could kind of tell it was him, but I thought he looked fine though. I mean, it was different. It wasn't gonna look like Robert Englund. They took it seriously. It's kind of on par with the Jason remake, the Friday the 13th remake. They both have a similar feel. They took Freddy seriously again in this. There's not a lot of jokes at all, really. I think this might be a little bit of humor, but it's like sadistic humor. So they made him scary again. That's one thing that they did achieve. The teenage actors suck in this too. They're a little better in this than I think Freddy vs. Jason. There was a lot of goofiness. The reboot doesn't really have that MTV quality to it. It's taken a little bit more seriously. The one complaint I hear mostly about this film is, other than the makeup, and some people didn't like it, the look of Freddy, but the main complaint I heard is they didn't like the pedophile angle, and because Freddy was always a child murderer, and the parents, they found him, they killed him, they burned him. But they never really got into him messing with kids that way, and this movie alluded to it a lot more, and some Nightmare fans were offended by that, and okay, yeah, I guess it makes sense. That kind of thing goes in hand. I mean, killing kids is just as bad. They're both bad. So yeah, I mean, he's not a good guy. So whether he was a pedophile or just killed kids, I mean, it didn't seem to matter to me. It's like he was still a horrible person. They may have made him out to be like he was sick, like he couldn't help it, kind of thing. But he's still a villain. He's still a bad guy. So was it any good? I mean, it was okay. Was it worth making another? Obviously they didn't. So they kind of just decided to stop there. Both franchises did. There hasn't been anything else since. I think Robert Englund reprised his role as Freddy on the Goldbergs TV show. But you know, like I said before, he's still young enough to do it, I think. You know, just put the makeup back on, the old dirty sweater, and he's good to go. So my thoughts on the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise overall, it's fairly decent. As you could tell by the way I went through the films, they kind of just get worse as they go on. So yeah, so I guess if I were to rank them in any kind of order, I'd say the first one, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, that's the best one by far. Part 3, The Dream Warriors, is a close second. That one was really good. And third would be the Dream Master. So Part 4. Thought that one, it wasn't great, but it was, you know, it still had some cool stuff in it. The final girl was good. You know, the way she kind of just took the reins and was like, okay, you know, I gotta go kick this guy's ass, kind of thing. That part worked. So yeah, third I would say is Part 4, The Dream Master. Probably. So fourth place would be Freddys Revenge, the second one, which you can skip. You don't even have to watch that one, because it really doesn't tie into the story at all, and it doesn't even play by the rules. It doesn't even play by the same rules most of the other films do. But it's kind of an out-of-the-box kind of entry in the franchise. But yeah, no, I would say that one next. Then I guess Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And then the rest are just kind of, you know, Freddy vs. Jason was okay. The remake and parts 5 and 6 are all, I guess, on the weaker side. I would watch the remake before parts 5 and 6, I guess. Again, yeah, the part 5 and 6, those are the weakest of them all. So those are my thoughts on the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So if you like what you saw here, check out my thoughts on the Friday the 13th franchise. That video is already up. And soon I will be doing the Halloween franchise, which is by far my favorite. I've seen all those movies multiple times. Halloween, the original Halloween, might be, it's not just my favorite horror film, it might be my favorite film of all time. Yeah, so looking forward to doing that. This was fun. Yeah, so thanks for swinging by, and don't forget to click like and subscribe. Helps me to create more stuff like this. I'm the Film Hack Dude. We'll see you next time. Sleep safe.